In the gacha game genre, power creep is usually inevitable, with old characters becoming outclassed and outdated as new ones release. Hu Tao, however, was released so long ago that it is incredible to think that she is at least as strong as ever, if not even quite a bit stronger than when she first came out. In addition, she has quite a few misconceptions and nuances about her kit, especially relating to her C1, her best weapons, her best teammates, and even her best artifact sets. And finally, she even has misconceptions on how good she actually is. We're going to talk about all of it so that you have the best information on whether or not you should get her and how to build her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Hu Tao is an on-field single-target Pyro DPS who in general relies heavily on Xingqiu, if not Yelan, to help her vaporize all of her hits to get max damage. She has always had some flexibility with her teammates, but since the release of Yelan, she has even more great options than she used to. She has a very cohesive kit that is one of the best designed early Genshin releases, and she has a ton of great things going for her and just a couple things that hold her back. So let's get started. One of Hu Tao's biggest strengths is that she has one of the highest single target damaging teams in the entire game, especially if you're willing to invest in her. And I'm not talking about only Primogem investment. If you invest in her artifacts and use good, even just 4-star weapons and invest heavily into her teammates, her teams can actually compete and outclass even the infamous Hyperbloom teams, which I know is hard to believe. Everyone says that Hyperbloom has power crept Hu Tao, but the reality is, if you're willing to go to a high level of artifact investment and or delve into her constellations or her staff of Homa, she can drastically outpace even Hyperbloom. Just as a personal anecdote, my Hu Tao is at Constellation 0 with a standard banner 5-star weapon, the Primordial Jade Wing Spear, and as long as I play her well and in the right teams, she consistently outperforms even my Hyperbloom teams that feature Alhaitham with a 5-star weapon, along with Yelan and Nahida and Kuki. Just goes to show you how powerful she actually is. She has surprisingly decent and serviceable AoE if you happen to require it. She's not a character you bring against AoE by any means, but if there's a Abyss side that has 2 single target chambers and 1 AoE chamber, she is more than good enough to deal with it, which we'll talk about more later. She has very high team flexibility, so you can tailor her teams to whatever your account has, whatever you want your playstyle to be, or the type of content that you're fighting against. If you're a player that likes to vertically invest into your characters, if you really love Hu Tao, she's honestly a great character to invest more heavily into. She gets great boosts from both her C1 and her Staff of Homa, but they're not required at all for her to perform at very high levels. She's also very free-to-play friendly in that she has tons of great artifact choices, weapon choices, and team choices. For her cons, she is somewhat mechanically intensive to play properly. She has not the best AoE. I mean, it's serviceable, but it's definitely nothing crazy. And she does have some comfort and or survivability and or stamina issues when she's at your Constellation 0. They can be mitigated, but they are something that you're most likely going to run into as you're playing her, especially if you're not at really high investment. Finally, she's very reliant on either Xingqiu or Yelan. You can get away with either or both, but having neither is going to be rough. For her value and power level, as always for value, it depends. I'd say she's especially valuable for accounts that are building out their 2 teams and they already have a team that maybe uses a Bennett Kazuha core. So maybe you're using Raiden Hyper on one side, or maybe you're using Child National, or maybe you're using some sort of Aggravate team, or maybe you're even using some sort of Nilu team. These are all really strong AoE teams that complement Hu Tao being on your other side perfectly, as Hu Tao is going to take up completely different supports than all of these, and she is primarily focused on single target, while these other ones that I mentioned are focused on AoE. So basically, she's a character that doesn't need to use Kazuha to function, and a character that doesn't need Bennett to function, and a character that doesn't need Nahida to function. The only disclaimer is a very popular team is Hyperbloom, which fulfills a very similar role to Hu Tao. So if you already have a good Hyperbloom team and you're happy with it, and you're looking for that second AoE team, then Hu Tao is not usually your pick. But if you love Hu Tao, rest assured that she will always have a place on your account as a valuable single target DPS. For power level, she is actually really high. I put her in my top 5 DPSs category. She competes with the best DPSs, the likes of Ayaka, Alhaitham, Raiden, Nilou, if you call her a DPS. Hard to say, Yai, or even Linny. Hu Tao is up there going toe for toe with any of them. Any one of these DPSs can be above or below the other ones, depending on what Abyss favors them. And if I didn't mention your favorite DPS, don't get mad. There's some others that could fit that group as well. I don't think I would quite put her in S tier. S tier for me is the highest tier, but she's definitely a potential contender, especially if you're willing to go for her C1 and or Staff of Homa. Now, just because she is one of the best characters in all of Genshin does not mean that she is by far one of the only characters that can be this high, or that she's like a must pull or a necessary pull or a pull that you need to have a good account. There's so many really good DPSs, even so many Pyro DPSs, and even someone like Yoimiya, although she's not as good, performs just as well in a lot of situations, if not very slightly below. So if you've got someone like Yoimiya, if you've got a Hyper Bloom team, you should feel absolutely no pressure to pull for Hu Tao. I think this is the perfect place for a DPS to be, being a character that is extremely strong and very impactful if you go for them, but not so ubiquitous that every account needs to pull for them. This is just the perfect character, and I love when they end up in this kind of spot. For teams, now this is a doozy because she has a lot of teams. Starting with the Overworld. When you're constructing an Overworld team, being a skill infusion DPS, she does have quite an advantage over characters that need their burst to do their damage. I would still recommend someone like a Xingqiu or Yelan for the Overworld, especially Yelan. In the Overworld, I think she needs a healer a lot more than she needs one in the Abyss. Setting the grass on fire and burning yourself, just slowly whittling down your HP, can be quite annoying, so running her with someone like Bennett or Kokomi for the Overworld is really nice. Of course, Zhongli can be good too. I personally prefer Yelan, Bennett, Kazuha as my Overworld core, but you know, it is the Overworld, so you can get away with just about anything. For Abyss and Abyss 12 teams, by far the most comfy and the most ubiquitous and really close to her peak damage is the Zhongli double Hydro. Zhongli is far from required to make Hu Tao function and is not even required to have a top ceiling team for her. But for Abysses that have aggressive enemies, or if you just want comfortable, no nonsense, clear times, this is going to be your go-to team. Zhongli can be built with the Instructor's Artifact set for extra reaction damage, with the Archaic Petra set for extra Hydro damage bonus. Yelan, of course, is built on Emblem, Xingqiu on Emblem, they're normal builds. One of them can get away with a more damaging weapon as opposed to both running Favonius or running Sacrificial. But Zhongli is a really great character here for his Omni Shred. Shredding both Hydro for Xingqiu and for Yelan, as well as Pyro for Hu Tao, is just very, very valuable. And of course, Xingqiu and Yelan together have amazing synergy with single target and allowing Hu Tao to vaporize her hits. This team is really, really good. And no, double Hydro is not carrying Hu Tao here. Hu Tao contributes to a very large portion of this team's damage. Now, obviously, the question is, well, what if I don't want Zhongli, or what if I didn't pull Zhongli? Who else can I use? You can use Layla. That is a great option for you. Freeze can be nice to keep enemies in place, but because this is generally a boss killing team, it's not usually super impactful. Personally, I find that Layla doesn't quite perform as well as Thoma in my testing, but my Thoma is Constellation 6 and my Layla is not even Constellation 4. So not only is her personal damage quite lacking, but also she doesn't get that buffing to Hu Tao that she gives at C4. You can also use something like Constellation 4 Yanfei or even Diona, although I don't like Diona as much because her shield is weaker than Layla and you really don't want the healing for Hu Tao, so you'll pretty much never be using Diona's burst. You do get some extra EM for Hu Tao, but that is counterbalanced by the fact that you're going to be healing up over half. So overall, Diona's not my favorite, but hey, if you have Diona built, you want to use her, you absolutely can. It's not really going to be much worse at all. This last slot is very flexible. It doesn't have to be a defensive option. If you're in AoE content, putting in something like Kazuha or Sucrose will be here. I do prefer Kazuha, but Sucrose, because of her elemental mastery sharing, is going to be a great option as well. Sucrose can even be a good option for single target because that's where she loses a lot of value is in AoE versus Kazuha because Kazuha's grouping is stronger. Like this last slot is truly extremely flexible. You could run something like Rosaria. You could run Beidou. You could even run Kirara if you wanted to. You could run Noelle as a shielder. You could run Shangling for Funirational. This is a nice and strong team. It's not my absolute favorite, but it does work. Don't forget Fischl. Fischl is very underrated. I hate myself for saying this, but you can actually run Thundering Fury on Hu Tao to get more skills. I think it's something like 2 skill infusions per rotation, and Fischl can enable that. But even if you don't do something weird like that, Fischl does do a lot of single target damage. In my testing, this team performs very, very similar to the Zhongli variant. So it does lack a bit in comfort, but it does perform on the highest level when it comes to damage. Believe it or not, you can even run something like Nahida, which creates like a Hu Tao Burgeon team. This team was the fastest performing team out of all the Hu Tao teams I played. It's just that you want to keep in mind that the Burgeons are going to hurt your Hu Tao in this team if the rotations get really far. So basically, the shorter the fights are, the more this is going to do. But it is really, really running on life support because the Burgeons are hurting yourself. So have to be really, really careful about that. Running other types of Dendro, such as Baiju, or running other characters such as Kazuo instead of Yelan, I did not find those worked well at all. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how strong this double Hydro core is. You can put so much in this last slot. You could even put Dea, and you could even put in something like Yunjin. And I'm sure I've missed some as well. There's just too much to count. You can also do a VV Vape setup. So the way you're going to do this is start off with Sing Cho, go into Bennett, double swirl with Kazuo, and then go crazy with your Hu Tao. You might want to forego Kazuo's burst or make sure that it's infused with Hydro so that you don't accidentally mess up some of your setups. You don't need to run Bennett here, although it's definitely the most comfy option. Running something like Toma, C4 Yanfei, or even Amber in this slot with Elegy of the End. This is actually the ceiling for this team. I would also like to keep you in mind that and address one of the misconceptions is that Yelan is actually really good as the solo applicator. There is some misconception that Yelan is not enough Hydro to make Hu Tao vape all of her hits. And while there are some scenarios where Pyro will eventually overtake Yelan, if you start your rotation with a normal attack on Hu Tao to apply Hydro, you are 9 times out of 10 going to be vaping all of your hits. And because Yelan's higher personal damage and buffing potential for Hu Tao is a factor, even if you miss a couple vapes, the team performs very, very similarly on the whole, and overall it's pretty much a wash. They perform pretty much exactly as good as each other. Also, if you are an Amber stan, getting Amber your copy of Elegy and putting her on a Hu Tao team is a great idea. I will say that Sing Cho does provide some defensive utility for Hu Tao. Being able to stack Hu Tao's innate interruption resistance along with Sing Cho's interruption resistance and Hu Tao's healing plus Sing Cho's healing, that is part of the core that gives the team so much survivability, even if you don't have a survivability in the last 2 slots. So just keep that in mind. You can replace Sing Cho with Yelan, but it might not always be the best idea. Finally, you can run her in mono Pyro. So for example, on the second half of this Abyss, I cleared with not too much trouble, although of course, without having a shielder against those very aggressive enemies in the end, my Hu Tao did end up dying, but we did 36 star with mono Pyro Hu Tao. It was no problem at all. It was worse than Linny Mono Pyro, but it was still really, really good. So if you really don't want to play her with Sing Cho and you want to play her on an AoE team, you actually can. But it's just that Mono Pyro's overall strength lends itself towards AoE and Hu Tao lends herself towards single target. So that's really the main downside for Hu Tao on this team. And her single target doesn't really get to shine the most because she can't vape her hits. Just to cover a couple things, I don't dislike Candace with her, especially if your Candace has C6, so that she does more personal damage. Running Candace as a second Hydro, if for example you need your Sing Cho on the other side. Plus, look at how badass this team looks. Like, damn, I'm excited to run Candace instead of Sing Cho on this team because, like, wow, the color matching is just beautiful. I don't really recommend Kokomi because the anti-synergy with the healing is not very good, and her Hydro application is not all that good for Hu Tao. You can also do some sort of freeze core with like Shenhe Rosari on their sides, and she's going to melt some of her hits. I know this is not something optimal, but it's something fun you can do. For her build, starting with level 90, if you're serious about Hu Tao, you do want to take her to level 90. It's not as imperative as a Hyper Bloom trigger or as an Anemo character, but it is just right behind that. She scales mostly with her HP, so getting to level 90 gets her a lot more HP. Very similar to Yelan and how you also want to get her to 90. For her talents, all of her talents are really good. Her normal attack has the most value, but her skill gives you a lot of value as well, as does her burst. She's a character that if you really love her, you can consider triple crowning her. She does get a lot from her talent levels, especially her normal attack. I've crowned mine. I kind of really do want to crown the others. Once I build every character, Hu Tao is going to be one that I come back to and even more invest in. For weapons, she has a lot of great options, both expensive and free to play. Obviously, her best is going to be Staff of Homa, with Staff of the Scarlet Sands being right behind it. You can check out kachingmains.com for their detailed weapon calcs on the sheet over here. You can also check out the Hu Tao mains FAQ for really great info as well. But overall, obviously Staff of Homa being the best. Surprisingly, she has a new option with the Battle Pass weapon, the Ballad of the Fjords. It does need 3 different elements on the team, but most of Hu Tao teams are going to be that way. But keep in mind, something like Hu Tao Double Hydro Toma will not work with the Ballad of the Fords. At R5, it even outclasses Dragon's Bane, although if you have R5 Dragon's Bane, that will beat Ballad of the Fords at R1. I think it's around R3 that Ballad of the Fords outpaces Dragon's Bane, so if you have a high refined Dragon's Bane and you're not going to be buying the Battle Pass a ton of times to get a high refined this, then it's not really worth it. I've seen quite a number of different calcs, to be honest. I've seen Staff of Homa be about 7% higher than Ballad. I've seen it be 13% higher than Ballad. I've seen it be 13% higher than Dragon's Bane, but I've also seen it be 20% higher than Dragon's Bane. So it's somewhere between 10 and 20% higher than Dragon's Bane, which is quite a substantial amount, and somewhere between 7 and 15% higher than R5 Ballad. Is that worth it for you? Well, that percentage is actually pretty relevant if you have a highly invested Hu Tao, but it's not something that's so high that she doesn't perform well without it. And Dragon's Bane is honestly so good for her. So is Deathmatch, so is Jadewing Spear, so is Lithic Spear. She has so many good weapon options that you really do have a lot of choices. Basically, you can go through this list and just pick the best one, whatever you have access to. If you're free to play and you have nothing, the Missive Wind Spear. If you missed this event, you can get the White Tassel. If you refined your White Tassel, I guess you can go for the Black Cliff Pull. But I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're free to play, then you can go for it and it's going to work out. So overall, I just like to give my comments on, is this worth it? I'm going to say yes, but with a caveat, and that's that I don't think that this particular weapon banner with Neuvillette is great, because Neuvillette's weapon is not that good with anyone beside Neuvillette. But like, if you're a free to play and you really love Hu Tao and you don't have other good options, then actually saving up to get a Staff of Homa could actually be worth it. Plus, it's one of the coolest looking weapons of the game. And because she does a really high percentage of the team damage, I do think you could argue that it's worth it. But again, she's so strong at C0 that it's really only after you build out both of your teams, you have all your favorite characters, then you want to start considering weapons like this, and this would be one of the first weapons that you'd go for. So yes, it's worth it, but not if you have to sacrifice other good characters or characters you love to get it. Another misconception is her artifacts. Nobody talks about a lot of good options for Hu Tao. She has 3 main artifact options that are all within 5 and 1% of each other. So coming out on top is just barely the Shimenawa's Reminiscence. Technically, for damage, this is her best set. However, if you like to play her on teams that do not have a shielder, it is really nice to always have your burst be available as a panic button. So it's not my favorite set. It's not the set that I would go for Hu Tao. But if you always play her Hu Tao with Zhongli and you have a good set, then this is a great option. Obviously, historically, Crimson Witch has been her best artifact set, and it is still an extremely competitive set. She's not fully able to stack the passive. She can only get 1 stack of the 4-piece set, so it's not like this is her signature set. She doesn't maximize this passive. This is Diluc's signature set. Hu Tao does not get nearly as much from it as Diluc does, but nevertheless, it's an extremely good option for her, and it's now available in the strongbox, of course, so you can always strongbox for it. But the third set that nobody talks about is the one that I personally use, because I have a really great set of it, is the Gilded Dreams. I had to farm a lot of Deepwood anyways, so I have an amazing Gilded Dreams set, and all Gilded Dreams is like within 5 and 0% of the other sets. The other nice thing is it provides a lot of EM, so you don't have to worry about rolling into EM on your substats. Basically, they're all so close that I would just recommend using whatever artifact set you have the best set of. Don't try and farm, like if you have a great Shim set, don't try and farm Gilded Dreams or Crimson Witch. If you had great Crimson Witch, don't farm for Shimenawa. If you have great Gilded Dreams, etc. Whatever one you have the best of, go for that one. They're all really, really good. Even 2-piece is not that bad, but there's 3 options. You might as well go for a 4-piece eventually. But if you're gonna do 2-piece in the meantime, 2-piece HP, 2-piece EM, 2-piece pyro damage bonus, are all going to be good choices. For main stats, you're going to want to go either HP or Elemental Mastery on her Sands, Pyro damage on her Goblet, and crit on her Circlet. Whether you go EM or HP mostly depends on what your substats are and what weapon you're using. For me, I'm using Gilded Dreams because it gives EM. Because it gives EM, then I can use an HP Sands and I still have a ton of Elemental Mastery once I create a reaction. So for me, HP is the correct one to go for. When I switch over to Crimson Witch, however, I go with Elemental Mastery because my substats do not use enough Elemental Mastery. They don't have enough Elemental Mastery to give me. How much is enough Elemental Mastery? Well, I think you want to have at least 150 to 200 plus. If you have less than 150, I would absolutely go for an Elemental Mastery Sands. If you do go for a weapon that gives Elemental Mastery, like the Battle of the Fords or the Dragon's Bane, then you can more likely go for an HP Sands. So if you have enough Elemental Mastery and you have enough HP, which one should you go for? Almost definitely the one with better substats, but you can always use the Genshin Artifact Calculator or the Genshin Artifact Optimizer, just Google that to find out for sure. For gameplay tips and rotations, my biggest tip, and of course, people are always asking, is Hu Tao difficult to play? Is she too hard to play? I do not find her difficult to play. I am not someone who plays a lot of video games. This is one of the only video games I play. I've never been very good at video games. I've never been very mechanically intensive. I don't think her stuff is crazy difficult to do. It does take some practice. It does take some getting used to, but I really don't think it's that bad. If you're super casual and you really just want to mash, she might not be the character for you. But I really don't think it's all that difficult. I do think there are some things you want to consider. Her gameplay at C0 can be a little silly, right? This is her jump cancel. You want to charge attack and then jump out of it. So it can feel a little bit less cool, and there are some tips to it, like you don't want to do it too early. If you do it too early, your attack doesn't actually come out, and if you do it too late, or if you jump sideways for it, then you can fling yourself the wrong direction. So it can take some getting used to. The other combo you can do is a normal attack before your charge attack jump cancel. I don't like it as much because it's a little bit more finicky and annoying to do. I got pretty good at it on mobile, but now it feels kind of clunky to me on controller, and I just don't like it. I would just prefer to go for a regular normal attack jump cancel, or just be heavily invested and do my dash cancel. As far as does she work on mobile, I think she works just fine on mobile, but it does depend on the responsiveness of your device. If you have a good device, like a high-level iPhone or Android that will allow you to run on 60 frames per second and you have decent ping, I think you're going to be just fine, just peachy on mobile. It's really quite totally fine. But if you're on sort of more of a potato phone, it might be much more of a struggle. You might prefer a more mashy character. But one thing that people don't talk about is she can actually dash cancel even at C0, like right here. Same thing, you don't want to do it too early or you'll cancel out the attack, and you don't want to do it too late or there's really no point in dash canceling. So it does take a bit of getting used to, but obviously at C0 you're going to run out of stamina pretty quickly if you're dash canceling. But it can still be worth it if you can burst down the bosses really fast. As you've been watching in my Abyss clears, almost all of the time I don't jump cancel with Hu Tao, because although you lose damage over an extended rotation, if you can beat the boss early on and not that many charge attacks, or if you can get into the next phase and you recharge your stamina as you wait for it to go to the next phase, it can be very worth it to go for dash canceling instead of jump canceling. I also find it way more engaging. I find it way more fun. And here's something that people don't consider. If you're able to burst down the boss, if you're able to dash cancel and you can burst down the boss before you run out of stamina, the difference between you having C0 Hu Tao and C1 Hu Tao is 0. The boss is dead and you dash canceled the whole time. Your DPS increase is 0. When they talk about C1 being a DPS increase, and I guess this is where we'll talk about vertical investment, when they talk about C1 being a DPS increase, it's not actually a DPS increase unless the boss takes more dash cancels than C0 Hu Tao will actually allow. I will confess my Hu Tao is kind of cracked out. Like if you look at my artifacts, they're kind of insane. And my weapon, I'm using the Jadewing Spear. It's behind the Dragon's Bane slightly. It's above the Deathmatch, but behind the Dragon's Bane. So it's not like I'm using a crazy weapon, but my artifacts are really good. But the fact is, very often I'm able to burst down bosses before dash canceling will actually matter. And even if I have to jump cancel, then that's fine. But if I was a Hu Tao main, which I kind of am, I would be tempted to go for C1 anyways. I know I've been talking down C1, but for every time that you can burst down the boss, there also are a number of times where you can't. And these are the situations or the times where you just mess up and you run out of stamina. And these are the times where you do really want C1. I personally already really want C1. It's going to take quite a bit of willpower for me not to go for it, so wish me luck. Speaking of vertical investment, people are always talking about should you get C1 or should you get Staff of Homa. I think C1 will be more fun. Plus, if you don't have constellations of Xingqiu will be on the banner along with Hu Tao. So getting extra copies of Xingqiu will be much more worth it on the way to her C1 than going for her weapon and getting whatever lousy 4-star weapons are going to be on that banner. However, although C1 will be the more fun constellation for her, Staff of Homa is the more universal weapon. Staff of Homa works very well on a number of different characters, so you definitely may want to switch it up and move Staff of Homa to someone else. But on this banner in particular, again, the Staff of Homa is paired alongside a banner that's not as good. Neuvillette weapon is very not universal, so it's probably not the greatest time to go for Staff of Homa. If you're a real Hu Tao main, you'll probably end up going for both eventually. Both are worth it. You can't really go wrong with either one, so whatever one you think you prefer, then go for that. Versus others, how does she perform against our favorite firework girl Yoimiya? How does she perform against Linny? How does she perform against Dehya, against Diluc, against Klee? Well, she is the best out of all of them, in my opinion. I do think the closest is Linny, but he is a little bit different because he is mono Pyro. I don't like Linny as much because getting knocked out of your charge attacks feels really bad. But if you are able to heavily invest into Linny, then you can run Zhongli instead, so that can heavily mitigate how that feels. I still prefer Hu Tao personally because she's so much more flexible in her teams and she is serviceable in AoE. So I personally think that Hu Tao is a step above Linny, but they are in the same tier. I do also think that Yoimiya is pretty underrated. She's not that much worse than Hu Tao, especially in certain circumstances where enemies are dashing around or moving back and forth, whether it's Kinky, whether it's Miro Maiden, whether it's other enemies that are moving around, the Weenut. Oftentimes you can gain some DPS back by not having to chase after an enemy. And Hu Tao, when she does have to chase after an enemy, she loses stamina and you lose out on potentially charge attack damage. So I think that she's closer than people think. Even I might have underrated Yoimiya on my last tier list, but I definitely think that there's no question about it. Hu Tao is a step above. I do think that Diluc is a significant step down against both of them, and Klee and Dehya just fulfill different roles, so I'm not even going to really compare them. I think Hu Tao's biggest competitor would be Hyperbloom, and I think that she even beats the Hyperbloom allegations. Even Yoimiya can outpace Hyperbloom just barely with proper investment. The one area though that Hu Tao really does take out Yoimiya is the benefit she gets from her weapon and from her Constellation 1. Hu Tao has to go pretty much all the way to Constellation 6 before she can compete with Hu Tao being C1 R1. So if you're someone who's really dedicated, then Hu Tao is the better character to really dig into. For future prospects, I think that there is a non-zero chance that she will work with Furina. It's possible that could even let her use the Maria Shisei artifact set, which you can already use. I should have mentioned in my artifact set options. It's a decent set, but she can't fully stack the passive, so it's not reliable. It's not super worth it for her. But if Furina allows her to do it and Furina does some, off-field skill damage and she's really good, then I could absolutely see her being a great partner for Hu Tao. If there's HP buffers in the future, potentially that could benefit Hu Tao. She's only aged like fine wine. She's gotten better and better as time has gone on and more characters because she normal attacks, but because of her ability to work with any normal attack character, to work with a lot of Hydro characters that do a lot of damage, and double Hydro having a beneficial resonance for her, I think that she's really only going to get better. I don't see that much changing after Furina comes out. I think that'll be one of the last buffs she get for a while, maybe until Natlin, and probably she doesn't get anything from Natlin. I think that she's very well fleshed out. She has a very top set. I don't see her falling down. I don't see her falling off. Genshin has been very clear that they're not really wanting to power creep anybody, so I think that you're very safe to pick up this character and know that she'll be good for a long while. Finally, for Overworld and aesthetic, I already talked about Overworld quite a bit earlier on. She's not my favorite character for Overworld. I much prefer someone like Yoimiya for that ease of use, for the range, for the comfort, but she is completely serviceable, especially if you're running, you might just need to run a healer. But Xingqiu does work because his rain swords do heal, so as you're running around, you can heal yourself back up with his rain swords. And for aesthetic, of course, she has one of the best party join animations in the game. She has one of the best designs in the game. I love the ghost. I love her overall aesthetic. One of my favoritely designed characters in the game. If you have thoughts on Hu Tao, if you have questions, feel free to join our Discord. Leave them in the comments. If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing. It really, really helps us out.